Thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome all the panelists. Thank you very much for joining us. With us this morning, we have Dr. Jason Scales, who's a business manager for education from Lincoln Electric. He is currently sitting in the USA. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
James McKenzie, who's managing director for Training Force. William Mokali, Departmental Manager, Skills Development and Training for the AIDC, and Dr. Anthony Gier, who's a Program Manager for Social Sustainability from the National Business Initiative. Welcome, James.
Morning, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. If you would indulge me, I'd like to just create a bit of context around the topic, which is scarcity of skilled artisans in South Africa. And after I've created context, I'll open up for the rest of the panel to proceed. In particular, South Africa has been challenged with massive unemployment. We're currently sitting at around about 35% unemployment, with youth unemployment sitting at a staggering 60%. In addition to that, one of the things that I always find challenging when we talk about scarcity of skills are the media generalizations around around the scarcity. So there is broad comments, but in reality, there's an oversupply in some skills and an undersupply in others. For example, a lot of young people choose to go the electrical route and are given incorrect career guidance. And the real demands, for example, in my opinion, lie in the diesel mechanic trade and also in instrumentation and other trades that are developing into more technician status. So that warrants some discussion, in my opinion. And then we also live with this strange contradiction of skill shortages, but massive unemployment. So we need to figure that one out. And this brings into question the linkages between government, industry, and educational institutional networks. And we really do need to examine these networks to understand these linkages and why we have this disparity in terms of outcomes and high unemployment. The other driving factor is a loss of experience to other markets. At ATI in 2017, we had one client who lost 17 diesel mechanics in 1 year to New Zealand. And we, once again, this is of massive concern. And then in terms of government policy, there is a drive to encourage the skilled trades. And we need to question, how can we produce quantity and quality? Because at the moment, we know that the quality is not where it should be, both in basic education and also in terms of what's coming out of the TVET. And the other key point that I think cannot be ignored is gender. There are more and more women coming into the engineering trades and other trades as well. And this is a positive move because women have do very well in those trades, particularly when the climate is properly set at a core company level. And then we also need to perhaps examine how current and future demands for skills will change, because things are moving exceptionally quickly nowadays, and with technology driving these changes, we need to be aware of this. And with that, the role of digital strategies to improve outcomes of our training. And finally, from a contextual point of view, I think career guidance has always been substandard in my view. I think we need to make parents, youth, and educators more aware of the value of mid-level skills, such as artisan skills, and start encouraging that. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over. And Jason, you're sitting in the States. I'm not aware of how familiar you are with our context, but do you have any opening comments that you'd like to make?
No, and one, thank you for allowing me to participate in the panel. It's quite exciting to learn about what's going on around the world. And I think that even though continents separate us, water separates us, I think globally we just fundamentally have an issue, and that's attracting a new workforce into skills. And it doesn't matter if we're in the United States, if we're in Africa, if we're in South America, we all have the same challenge, and that's just attracting the right talent to fill these pipelines of work that we have. And when you think about the role of education, industry, and government, I mean, we all have a role in it, and that's why Lincoln Electric, the welding company, we're engaging in education in a completely different way, because not only do we understand where the technologies are going, but we also understand the skills and the varying different skills that we need in welding. That's going to keep the industry propped up and keep the industry very strong. So why would we not get involved and engaged at a different level? And I think too, when you look at the challenge of filling the pipeline, it goes back to how are we promoting ourselves? So if I put out the image of welding to the masses, do I want a dirty, grungy, old, manufacturing facility that has sparks flying all over the place and there's things going on? That may not be the image that we want to portray it with. It's got to be something that's more exciting and more engaging, or more representative of what we're doing today. So I even say that sometimes we're our own worst enemy by putting out the wrong imagery about a skill, or the wrong imagery about the type of work that people can engage in. So it's not a silver bullet that's going to fix this. It's a multi-pronged approach. There's different ways to engage at different levels, and there's different stakeholders that we really have to talk to. So I'll pause there, but it's thank you for allowing me to participate in the panel today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Jason. James, would you like to share your views?
Yeah, morning, Sean. Morning, everyone. Thanks for also having me on the panel. I think it's exactly what Jason was saying. I think in South Africa specifically, we've got massive graduate unemployment, and I think there's a massive requirement to reintroduce the trades at a school career level. The technical schools have fallen by the wayside in South Africa as well in terms of technical qualifications. I think generally, what happened, obviously, you either go academically or technically. I think there's been a huge drive to get people into universities rather than into what industry actually requires. So I think there's a drastic re-engineering we require, specifically after COVID. And I think partnering with industries and big industries as well on the technology side, and I think really getting learners from school into workplace. And I think the concept of micro-credentialing as well, and building up towards a qualification as opposed to the qualification being the proxy to entry into jobs, because I think there's a big drive in South Africa, also because of our legacy, for people to get degrees rather than on-the-job working experience. And I think there are a number of programs and incentives in South Africa through learnerships, apprenticeships, etc., that really encourage companies to bring youth specifically into workplaces. So again, I think the whole system needs to be flipped and put on its head. As opposed to going to university, we need to be building towards what industry requires. And again, I think, like Jason says, I think we are our worst enemy. I think how we position trades in terms of a career choice is going to be critical in that process. Sean?
Jason, yeah, James, thank you for that. And I concur with what you're saying. I remember when I was young, up until the mid-80s, a lot of parents defaulted to telling their kids to go and get a trade. And it seemed to become out of vogue on a global scale. Jason, I'm sure you'd agree with us that where parents suddenly flipped into being totally focused on university, and many kids forced into university when they really should not have been there, and used their unique, different intelligence somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. William, do you have any comments that you'd like to make based on what Jason and James have shared with us, and your own views as well, please?
Morning, good morning to everyone, and thanks for getting me on the panel to share my experience with the rest of the team. I fully concur with what my previous colleagues have said already. The challenge indeed, among others, that I want to bring on board here is about the mismatch of the qualification and the supply of needs, needs in terms of the industry itself. But mainly and in most cases is that if one takes, for example, a situation whereby TVET colleges are offering trades or programs, most of the programs that are being offered at a TVET sector level are a real mismatch to what the industry needs are. And that by itself creates a very serious challenge in as far as the employment issues is concerned. So having said that in particular is that up to a point where there is a collaborative effort that speaks to bringing the two parties together, training will run parallel to what the job needs are. And having said that, indeed, from the document that is prepared by the Department of Higher Education and Training, namely the skills supply and demand in South Africa, it's clear if one reads it carefully that indeed what the education sector is doing is parallel to what the industry needs are. There is a serious mismatch there. And the other issue is that even though learners are enrolled, for instance, at the TVET sector level, most of them don't necessarily meet the entrance requirements to deal with a particular trade against which they are being trained. The second issue in that same space is that the interests of the learners are not necessarily with the training that they are offering. Given the challenges that the country finds itself in terms of the unemployment figures that today are over 30%, which is very, very disturbing and alarming indeed. We realize that instead of parents and the communities directing learners where their interests are and where the interests in terms of the skills shortages are, they just say to a learner, go to a TVET college or so, as long as my child, you are outside my house and you are occupied by doing something. So that by itself also does not necessarily assist us in any way to drive this. So there is a serious challenge, and we know how long it takes. It doesn't take any period below 3 years for curriculum to change. And in that space, a lot of damage is done already. You did make mention also in your opening scene when you make mention of a number of trades that are in high demand. I can just briefly, in closing for now, mention among other critical in the industry, wherein also we don't get more learners into in that space. One of which, among others, will be the autotronics. The other one is the mechatronics. The other one is auto electrician, panel beaters, spray painters, boiler makers, mechanical fitters, motor mechanics, welding, and the one you mentioned, the instrumentation. Now, when we look into the TVET sector itself, visit any of the nearby TVET colleges, you won't find this combination in there at all. And that's point one. And lastly, the other point will be, there is no experiential training enforced in the syllabus itself to say, before you come back, say you are doing N1 or N2 or so, before you come back, you must have been linked with the industry in order to do your experiential training. And that speaks to partnerships and linkages, which indeed remains a challenge so far. Thanks, Sin, back to you.
William, thank you for your input. I think you've raised some very important points there, and I appreciate it. Anthony, you've been involved for many years in artisanal training in various different sectors, including TVET, private, and corporate roles. Would you like to share some of your views, and also perhaps, gents, what we should do once Anthony shared that is start looking more at what the solutions are, because there's nothing worse. I think we're becoming very aware of some of these key issues. And then after Anthony shared his inputs, maybe we can start talking about how we can address some of these scarce skills issues. And
yeah, thanks, Sean. I think it's always good to go last because you can so feeding off what James and William have both alluded to. I think my biggest concern the biggest concern in the work that I do is around how we achieve meaningful economic inclusion. And the underlying challenge that we face is that our economy is fundamentally not transforming, and there's still very strong structural inequity between the bottom of the pyramid and what happens in your relatively small but powerful formal sector. And we're struggling to create the linkages between these two. We haven't really cracked that. So it means that a large number of our young people are effectively locked out of meaningful economic activity. And from a skills development point of view, it has a number of implications. One, that access to artisan training is very restrictive. It's very exclusionary, and the system is quite rigid. It doesn't really allow for broader inclusion and broader access for particularly young people from poorer communities. That's the one side of it. And then the other side of it is that we're spending a hell of a lot of money and we're getting very little return in terms of employment and growth. So there's these two sides to the issue that we're trying to tackle. The one is how do you create a system as both previous speakers have spoken to, that's more agile, more responsive, and that's targeted more at where the needs are. But on the other hand, how do you make sure that there are these meaningful pathways into those opportunities, and that you can have a more inclusionary approach to that? So that's really the kind of focus of our work. It's to take it much more from a bottom-up perspective. Obviously, you've got to deal with policy issues, you've got to deal with regulatory issues, you've got to deal with systemic issues that really restrict the system to produce, but then you've also got to have solutions in terms of how you respond to those from the ground, how you create different mechanisms for young people to access opportunities. So I don't talk about, and I'm a little bit disruptive, I suppose, in this regard, but I don't talk a lot about trades per se, in the form of like the focus on artisans and the almost mythical thing we've created about producing artisans. What I think we have to look at it a bit more broadly is to look at it as artisanal skills and trade skills, and that there are a myriad of applications of trade skills outside of the formal trades, in terms of that you don't have to wait 3 years to produce a qualified person to do various sorts of artisanal skills that can result in employment, self-employment, and that sort of thing. So we look at it from a much broader, more holistic perspective. And when you envision that, then the system starts to open up, and the possibilities start to open up, rather than being constrained by narrow qualifications, narrow conceptualizations of what we mean by trades and what we mean by artisans. But
Thank you very much. Yeah, great, Anthony. I think within some of your comments there may lie some of the solutions we're looking for. And if you look at the economy in Africa and how things have worked, James, you also touched on the concept of credentialing, and it kind of echoes what Anthony's saying. And if you look at how people buy things in Africa, they often buy in smaller units. So they'll buy one cigarette at a time instead of a pack, or a sachet of alcohol, or and so we almost need to relook at pricing models and how you could create modules and package modules that could help achieve what Anthony's saying, where we could have economically active participation without having to go through a full-on artisanal qualification. So it makes sense. James, do you want to add anything to what Anne said there?
Absolutely, Sean. I think I think the biggest challenge we've got is exactly, I mean, you know, we've got, excuse me, 6.7 million youth that are unemployed. And they, like I was saying earlier, the education system, even, you know, I don't know the dropout rate for degrees, you know, people dropping out after 2 or 3 years. So I really think the ability to bring people into workplaces and start earning, even through small skills and building towards a qualification, is definitely one of the solutions in Africa and in South Africa. You know, the examples when I was at Barloworld, where people were studying BComs, but at the same time were doing apprenticeship programs, diesel mechanic programs at the same time. So they were earning stipends, and so the ability to start earning and getting practical experience while they were studying correspondence. And I think the online world has opened up that opportunity now. So for the ability for you to still go and do your mainstream BCom or whatever thing online while you're actually earning on the job, getting practical experience. The examples I use is after 3 years, there was a group of young kids that exited Barloworld with BComs, 20 of them with BCom degrees, and were qualified diesel mechanics. And so the ability for those individuals now, a number of them have started their own businesses. And I think also a huge opportunity in South Africa is really in the SMME space. I think we need to really focus to say, especially with the high unemployment rates, companies are not going to be able to absorb as many learners or appies into their workplaces. So how do we create a space where we can start creating entrepreneurs and start having those discussions at a school level, you know, sort of start bringing entrepreneurial discussions and skills at a school going level to say, you know what, you know, the normal process of exiting, going to university and getting a job is no longer the norm. We need to look at things very differently, I think. And, you know, there are great opportunities for that. So absolutely, I think it starts at an education, a school level, career level, but also companies need to relook at how we, you know, how we recruit and how we attract talent into our organizations. We shouldn't be saying you need a minimum degree. We should be saying, actually, we need people with, you know, native qualifications or technical qualifications that we can grow and develop into our businesses.
Yeah. Jason, I'm going to bring you in a minute because I want to hear from William, and it'll give you a nice opportunity to give us your views from a developed economy perspective. So, William, if you could just share your views on some of these comments that have been made.
I might have missed you. Just reiterate the question
William,
again.
if just your views on some of the points that Anthony and James have raised.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Yeah, in terms of what my previous colleagues have alluded to, it remains a challenge indeed in terms of bringing the two together. Because what's key here now, what the country needs more than anything else, it's hands-on. You know, one has to really move away from a classroom approach point of view in terms of alleviating the poverty in the country, as well as unemployment rates in the country, and move these learners to a practical situation, a practical environment wherein they will realize it's not just there to be read, but read in terms of translating it into practice. So what I see as a disjuncture, which really comes out from time to time, and also to my colleagues, is that up to a point where before a learner is being enrolled, be it at a university or at a TVET college, the question is, where does your interest lie? What is it that you want to do? Because I think one of my colleagues did make mention of the stipend. You know, what we see now of late happening in terms of training is that we've got what you call stipend. You know, for as long as I've got money for transport, I've got money for something to eat and drink, for me, it's okay. As to what happens with what I'm doing, it's immaterial. And from the sector skills frame that one looks into from a SITA point of view, one realizes how much wasted through stipend payment, because you could find that a learner would register for 2 different trades at the same time, and a learner also receiving stipends in all these instances. And in no way would this learner even be able to complete the training that he or she undertakes. So at the end of the day, it's time wasted, money wasted. And now again, we are stuck with what you call unemployment that's going up. The question one would ask is, don't we have long careers? Or the second issue would be, even after training, do they really satisfy the employer's needs? You realize that the papers that they are coming up with, be it from whichever institution, does not speak in any way to what BMW would require, to what VW would require, or any employer would require. And this is where the disjuncture is. And lastly and briefly, I would also want to bring this issue of the trades that indeed, when one looks into the TVET sector, perhaps in particular, you realize that most of the trades that are being pursued in those institutions do not speak to the auto sector. Less than 20% of them speak to that. And what is disheartening the most would be, one has a TVET sector a few meters, less than 5 kilometers away from BMW or away from the auto manufacturing also. But none of the program offerings in that institution speak to what the industry needs are. You realize that most of the trades offered there, or most of occupations offered in that college, speak to business related, be it administration, be it personnel management or so. And in the same cohort or conurbation within which where the TVET sector is situated, the unemployment is very high. So we should come to a point where we niche programs with employment within the surrounding where the TVET college or education institution, so that we can then say we train for employment and for entrepreneurship. But as we speak now, neither of the two is being addressed. And then the other last issue is the pass rate is very, very deploring. It's very low, and no one would even bother as an employer to go and assist that. And that's why most of such institutions are not even sponsored by employers, because the question is, what is there for me? Thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, William, you've painted quite a bleak picture of the TVET landscape. And I do think there are a handful of TVETs that are doing very well, but the vast majority, unfortunately, do reflect the picture that you've painted. Jason, hearing some of the issues that have been raised and some of the key points, how does this echo for you in sitting in a developed economy like America? Are there any similarities or dissimilarities?
Absolutely, there are. We have the same challenges because what happened was, we in the United States and even in developed economies, we pushed everybody to the university as well. We said, you need to either you're going to do this, or you're going to do this over here. And we need to change it from the word "or" to the word "and." You can do this, and you can do that. And really start building out the choices. The other challenge that we have is, when we all grew up, we probably tinkered in the garage with somebody. We built things with our hands. We did things that today a lot of youth just don't have the opportunity to do. And so they don't understand what the skilled trades offer. They have no concept of what somebody in the building trades might do. They don't understand what a person as a mechanic or a technician at a BMW dealership might do. They don't realize how many computers are in a BMW, and it's more about interfacing with technology than it is sometimes turning the wrench. And so the question really becomes, and we're struggling with this too, even here in the US, is how do you now let these youth or incumbent workers, unemployed, to engage with an area in the skilled trades to develop an understanding of it, to see if they even like it. Is it something that they would want to do for the rest of their life, or something they would get engaged in? And there's nothing wrong with somebody coming in to take a class and then saying, you know what, that's not really for me. I think I need to go to the diesel mechanic side. I really like working with the mechanics and understanding that and trying it. And so it's I think the path forward is you have a career development pathway that has a bunch of on-ramps and off-ramps to it, where people might get back into the education sector to get more skills or skill up. And that's where short-term certificates come in. Those stackable certificates that bring either more opportunities in the employment sector or allow them to go explore in a different way. So if you have more on-ramps and off-ramps, then you have more flexibility in the system for people to come in and get reskilled, upskilled, or meet what the employers are now doing and adopting technology. So like I said, it's not that there's one silver bullet here. It's more about how do we get access to the people that need it to develop those skills or get those credentials? And then how do we start really marketing it so people can truly begin to engage with it in a different way to understand what the opportunities really are?
And Jason, from a funding point of view, how is that how are those pathways funded in the US?
So what's going on right now, when you look at the school sector, it used to be that you would not count a student as a completer until they got the diploma. It was either a 2-year diploma or a 4-year diploma. And now the rules are changing to where if they get a certificate or short-term credentials, we're starting to be able to count those as completers, which goes into the metrics of the government funding that helps fund those schools and those trade schools. And so that's why I'm saying it's not just a singular approach to fix this. It's really going to be a multi-layered approach. And if we have 6.7 million youth that are unemployed or don't have an opportunity to go get those skills or go skill up, that's a significant problem on top of the 34% that are employed. So it's just in the US with COVID, we lost our hospitality market. I mean, there was just as many jobs in restaurant and hospitality as there was in manufacturing. So now the question is, how do you now reskill up all those people, get all those incumbent workers back into that employment pipeline, but really get them the right skills for the right job at the right time, and we can start to find some more success.
Yeah, some good points. I think our challenge also lies in funding. We just don't have the resources, as Anthony pointed out earlier, to do large-scale quality programs like this. Maybe a solution lies in some of the digital learning opportunities that are out there. Anthony, do you have any comments around that challenge?
Look, I don't think it's a case of that we don't necessarily have the money. I mean, you could argue that we don't have the money, but I don't think that that's necessarily the primary issue. I think it's a big primary issue is the way the money is spent. When we started out, and MBI has been doing work in the kind of artisanal space and the TVET space for the last couple of decades. When we started out doing, trying to solve the problem of artisan development, a lot of the focus was on our large industries. A lot of the focus was on our formal apprenticeship system. And we tried to see how we could scale that up, how we could grow artisans over and above what companies were training at the time, and ramp up the number of artisans that we could produce. We didn't crack it, and we still haven't cracked it. And we've had decades of the artisan, and we've had various sorts of initiatives, and we're still focusing very much on growing our formal apprenticeship system and in different ways, whether it's traditional, whether it's through the dual system or whatever it is. The fact of the matter is we don't have enough money for that system. We're not growing. We're not growing the number of artisans that we're developing on an annual basis. We go through we go through these processes of saying that we need to, increase the number of artisans in the economy, but we don't have the resources to produce them through the current system as it exists. That's the one side of the equation. So for me, it's the way that the money is spent. The other side of the equation is that we still have a large number of those unemployed youth who will never access that artisan training system. So effectively, the system itself is quite exclusionary. As I've said, the barriers to entry are quite high. And unless you have the right networks, if you come from the right educational background, and you meet a whole lot of really strict criteria, the chances are you're never going to be able to ever embark on a career towards becoming an artist. So we need to relook at our models. We need to relook at how we use our limited resources more effectively to have a much broader base of opportunity. And to my mind, the key thing is twofold. One is, where are the jobs? Because we should be focusing on where are the jobs. You've already alluded to the fact that we're training too many electricians. Even if we reduce the number of electricians and focused on other trades, the thing is we don't have enough jobs, right, to even absorb a lot of the artisans that we're producing. So, and even if we did, again, we're still not cracking. We're not going to crack the unemployment situation that way, because we're only ever going to be able to produce very few jobs in that sort of mold. So the question is, where are the jobs? And I think we've already alluded to some extent to the fact that the large number of jobs, or the job potential, employment growth potential, is in the SME environment. It's not in our large companies. Our large companies are not labor absorbing. Yes, they're training apprentices, they're training artisans, but then they release them. And then what happens to them? So the question is, we see the opportunity, we haven't even begun to unlock the potential of the SME environment for employing young people that want to or aspire to become artisans one day, and can get into, through a limited scope of intervention, of training, can get into workplaces and start embarking on that career path outside of the formal apprenticeship system. So that's the key thing. But to unlock that potential is quite a significant, because in the last 25 years, we haven't really unlocked the full potential of our SME environment. We know that our entrepreneurial or our level of entrepreneurship in the country is quite low. So we have to put a much more concentrated effect on the demand side of unlocking the opportunities across the economy, and not just focusing on our very small, large-scale, large-sized companies in our formal sector. So that's on the demand side, and I think that's a critical thing. On the supply side, it's that the pathways have to be broadened. We have to think out of the box and be more disruptive in terms of the kinds of pathways that we're creating into opportunity. If we can unlock the demand, if we can look at our SME environment, and remember that in many of the industries that we're talking about, and I'm talking outside of, but even in the automotive and other industries that are quite strongly focused on high-end manufacturing, a large of the number of the industries that we're talking about are made up of large numbers of micro businesses, many of them which operate in the informal economy. So in the plumbing sector, we know that 83% of our businesses are informal. Now, if 83% of our businesses are informal, and we're expecting to produce, plumbers, we have to be able to untap or unlock the opportunities in that broader informal sector. So the SME environment is quite a complex and quite a broad-based thing that we have to focus on, and we're working on solutions around how we do that. How do we meaningfully transform that bottom end of the economy, that large informal economy that has to now, be brought into formalization, be brought into, supply chains and value chains and that sort of thing. But then on the supply side, the issue is now, how do you respond to that demand? And that requires different approaches to trading, right, and preparation of young people. We can't afford to run apprenticeships in the way and learnerships in the way that we're doing them, and that whole thing around doing the same thing over and over and not having a different result. We can't continue to proliferate the kinds of models that we've been using over the last 20 years and expect a different result. We need new models of supply of skills. We need to disrupt the system, whether it's micro-credentialing, whether it's stackable, whatever the lovely terms that we like to use these days. I think the point about it is that it's really about, how do we link into the demand? How do we train for jobs, not for qualifications? And I think we've made that point already. Qualifications can follow. Yes, you can, and we want everyone to work towards qualification. We want to give equal opportunity for our large numbers of young people, particularly marginalized young people, to work towards qualification. That requires different learning pathways. It requires opening up vocational pathways in a very different and more creative space. And that requires changing the system, because the system doesn't allow us to do that. So I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people, particularly people in government, people in industry, people in our CETAs and all over the place, that the system doesn't work. And it's a very hard sell because everyone's got vested interest in making the system work as it currently does. It's linked into our skills development, levies, and it's linked into our triple BE, requirements. It's linked into a whole lot of incentives that don't facilitate employment. You actually have to disrupt the skills development system completely. And you have to see the alignment of what you're doing in the TVET system to what's needed in industry where the jobs are. And that's a different sort of approach. It's not like saying, oh, companies, the large company, are able to train, so we must train for that. No, we have to look at where is the alignment in terms of economic growth, economic recovery. Where are the sectors where we can really grow jobs, particularly in our SME environment? How do we unlock those on the demand side? And then how do we line up the supply with alternative pathways and alternative training interventions, that different forms of recognition, as we said, micro-credentialing, whatever it is, different forms of recognition that can quite easily get more large numbers of young people into workplaces, let them train on the job, let them work towards qualifications over time, but just get them into the jobs in the first instance. Find the jobs and get them into the jobs, and then you can build from there. Sorry, that was a bit of a long response.
No, but Anthony, I think you're raising really important points, especially within the context of where we sit. James, do you think, reflecting on what Anne's saying, there could be more focus on ARPL, that's the recognition of prior learning, because if you look at the markets, particularly in the township environments, and that there are a lot of people doing artisanal work, but don't have any recognition for it. Do you think there's a role that we could focus on there?
Yeah, Sean, absolutely. I mean, you think of the town economy and you think of roadside mechanics, you think of welding guys on the side of the road, etc. And those guys and ladies aren't brought into the economy. I think companies also now, with the impact of COVID, aren't going to be in a position to absorb more employees. So we need to be looking at our broader supply chain within the communities that companies operate within as well, and say, how do we incorporate those individuals into the mainstream training initiatives and funding? The focus has really been on employees and then providing a workplace experience. We need to be saying, we need to look at broader supply chains. So in the mining space, obviously we've got labor plans, etc., but we need to be saying what industries are actually currently happening in those environments, and how do we RPL those people, give them the knowledge, or how do we then start building them towards the standards that we require? Because by doing that, we'll create further opportunities, because the roadside mechanic is going to be more efficient, and we'll be able to start employing people. I think there's a big role for big industry to play a far more proactive role. If I look at roadside mechanics, and you spoke around the need for diesel mechanics, the big OEMs need to be saying, how do we actually talk into that? Training Force, we ran a program, an emerging handyman program, where we said, let's look at the supply chain. How do we distribute cement, in terms of the last mile? And those individuals, how do we then train them up in basic skills to be able to not just supply goods, but also then have the skills to follow through and actually be able to be home builders, etc., etc. So I concur with Anthony's view. I think we need to look beyond the traditional training space, and we need to be looking at the entire supply chain and communities that surround organizations, because I think where the economy is at the moment, for us to inject the skills that we require, companies, for a while, it's going to take some time for companies to normalize and be able to employ people. So I think the model needs to radically change.
And I wanted to ask Jason, in the US, in terms of new technologies, so for example, if you look at renewable energy and those types of things, how is the USA gearing up to create skills pipelines in that, and to address those future needs?
So I think we're working on it. I mean, there are certainly community colleges that are putting in renewable energy systems. They're putting in different education pathways and stuff. I don't know how deep it's trickled down into the secondary level, or what we call our high schools here, really where students would get introduced to that. And so I think they're relying more on the mechatronics side of it. You're looking at STEM education. There's technology education that them too, but I'm not going to say that I see this dramatic focus on some of these different pathways, and I think they're going to rely on different things to come together to do it. But one thing I'd like to add, and I think the opportunity here is that if we want to get big business involved, or we want to get companies and industries involved, then I think we have to look about how we're going to marry the skills and marry industry together. And when I think about World Skills Africa, I think about Skills USA, I think about just world skills in general. When you start to bring a level of competition together, and you bring industry and students together and let students really show off what they can do, I think you start to really change the narrative. And I think you really start to build a bridge between education and industry, because you can't make those events happen without industry. And industry is such a critical role of that. And I think, one of the dreams I have, and I throw it out in the US all the time, one of these days I'm going to have a skills draft. And what I mean by that is, in sports, we always have an NFL draft. We have these big events where people go play their sport. What if we did it with skills? I mean, we've got to just think about something in a completely different way to promote what these youth are doing and what they're learning. And then what's that carrot to get industry involved? And how are we going to make that connection? And once we start doing those things, then I think the magic will really start to unfold.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Yeah, some valid points, and I think to a large extent, when you look at education, there are a lot of old grey men and women driving education systems, and I think we sometimes misread the youth quite significantly, and we need to start thinking differently. William, some of your reflections at this point?
Having listened to my colleagues, indeed, a number of issues that I would have to also share, I must really fully concur with the issues they've covered. Wherein James did make mention of the ARPL and the RPL, is what we are currently busy with at where I am now in AIDC. In terms of the community within which we are operating as well, and the skills gap, in terms of training. We did make mention of this extensively. Like I said, I really fully concur with my colleagues in there. In terms of the communities within which we are operating, this is where we need to really start. If one speaks about unemployment rates, which are very high, the question is, who are we talking to? What are we really addressing? Unless indeed, like Anthony's also referred to in terms of us being brutally honest with ourselves, unless indeed we dissect, the communities within which the industries are or education is being offered, and sector by sector, area by area, and then we start to look into what is it that this community is capable of doing and can deliver. And based on that, like we did also make mention of the TVET sectors, be it universities or institutions of higher learning, what is it that they are offering? Is there any return on investment with these institutions within which they find themselves? One. Two, is there any return in investment of the industries within which they find? One looks into the skills that these communities possess, because one will be surprised indeed to realize how much of the plethora of skills that these people have. However, there is a mismatch in terms of employability, because one would be trained, be it a welder or whatever, but the person would not necessarily translate to being an employee, can then be left as an entrepreneur and be assisted to pursue that field, and then try to find ways by which we therefore bring on board skills gap in order to equip such an individual, and then build around that person, other, things to then recognize in that community. Because in most cases, one thing that when we address unemployment is when people are employed, which is not necessarily the case. Is when also people are able to translate their skills into a business wherever they find themselves. The other issue that I also need to bring on board, which also is a bit disturbing, which is not necessarily being fully attended to. If one looks again into the TVET sector, which is the sector of choice that should be able to assist us. If one looks into what the industries indeed are in need of and the workforce that needs to be employed there, I'm saying this, we can check into it later in depth, but less than 40% of the workforce needed by the industry, less than 40% are people coming from the university. 60% and above, indeed, are coming from the TVET sector or the community themselves. The question one would ask would be, are the lecturers also that are offering such training in such institutions are trained or not? You just make mention, MSc, the issue of the aging. So the succession planning as well. One looks at the resignation at those institutions when people are leaving, even if they might be offering good programs for employability. But the question among others will be, do you have capable trainers to translate theory into practice? Because that's also key. Does not also help to have someone having a book in front of whoever, say 1, 2, 3 in terms of theory, but there's no translation of theory into practice. So that lens is completely out of the box, because whoever is assisting that person does not have the skill to translate that into practice. So the other issue that I also wanted to close up on is, look, we have been speaking about, currently as we speak, issues that we have been addressing and the countries have been addressing are pre-COVID-19. The question is, what is it now that one is planning post-COVID-19? Because unless also we are able to look beyond this area, whatever issues currently that we are grappling with, most of them are pre-COVID-19. Are we now positioning ourselves correctly for skills revolution post-COVID-19 era? Again, we will be lost in that. So we've got to be brutally honest with ourselves, to revolutionize program offerings, to revolutionize the communities, to revolutionize ways by which we should come on board in order to align skills shortage post-COVID-19 with what is. And then, Sin, you also spoke about critical issues. The future is what we need to also bring them on board. So the time has come for us now to look beyond the current and say, like for instance, we should be speaking about the electric vehicles. What is in there for youth in terms of program offerings? We should be speaking about hybrid engines. What is there for youth for training? So unless these issues are being touched, it's very interesting enough that basically everyone today is being able to speak about sanitizing and masks and social distancing. But how many of the people out of 10 one can relate to hybrid engine, electric vehicle, testing stations, you name it? We've got to introduce this terminology in them by way of preparing the ground. So we should not be late. Positioning skills revolution for post-COVID-19 era. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Thank you. And James and Jason, I'm going to give you guys a quick opportunity to wrap up. We've got 5 minutes left. Anthony, your final comments in a minute or two, max?
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. I mean, I think, as I said, I think for me, the key issue is, where are the jobs? And this is the issue that we've got to tackle. If we're looking at the township economy, and I think that both James and William have spoken quite articulately to that. Till I think that if you look at the potential of the township economy to create jobs, How do we unlock that? And I think that's about finding entrepreneurs. We need to find those township entrepreneurs. We need to find those that really have the appetite and the capability to grow, and the skills. We need to support them to do that. And as part of that, then we unlock the demand for jobs and skills in those communities. And then it means young people don't have to travel far to go and find jobs outside of the communities, spending lots of money on transport and other things for jobs that don't actually exist, knocking on doors for jobs that don't actually exist. So we got to look at these township communities, and we got to look at where's the potential, where's the entrepreneurial potential within those townships. How do we grow? How do we build on that? And how do we use that as a lever to create increased demand for skills and jobs? And I think that's where the solution lies.
Yeah, and perhaps we could add on the rural areas as well. I think
yes.
I think we could include that because there's some very highly densely populated rural areas.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And then I think the last point is that if we can do that, how does our TVET system and our skills development system now respond to that? How do we make sure that we can create that alignment through appropriate programs that prepare young people for those jobs in their communities?
Thank you. James?
So I think the first thing is to focus on the schooling, to say, position artisanal trades as a career choice and not a choice of a second choice. I think looking at how do we network, again, we spoke about communities, rural areas, etc. Looking at existing entrepreneurs, and the RPL component is big. I think it's a huge opportunity that we're not focusing enough on. Micro-credentialing to get people into the system to start earning an income and start building towards a qualification. I think that's critical because, an apprenticeship program is 3 years until you start, you actually qualify. So how do we get people into the system? And I think micro-credentialing is one of those key things. And then I think we've got to be more creative around, and William mentioned around what's happened post-COVID. How do we leverage technology to give students or learners access to certain things where they would need a traditional workplace? So how do we introduce augmented reality? How do we bring AI into scenarios to actually start giving learners access to be able to diagnose machines or engines, etc., where they don't actually have to go into a workshop? So how do we leverage technology post-COVID-19, to give people that practical experience where they may not have current access to traditional workplaces?
Great, thank you, James. Jason, comment?
Yeah, so I not to restate what everybody said, I fully agree with what everybody's been saying. And with William, I think you were kind of going this direction, but one of the things we have to do as well is we have to recognize that skills are shifting, skills are changing. I don't need the same welder that I needed 10 years ago today. And there's different industry segments that need a different type of welder. But a lot of times when we talk about skill development, we talk about just a welder without really saying, has it changed today? Is the market shifting? Are we getting into technology? What is that technology? How is it impacting what we're doing? Because how we weld frames of cars together is completely different than how I weld in the mine when I'm hard facing buckets or shovels or different things like that. So I think not only do I accept all the challenges that you guys have put up there, but we've also got to start looking at what are the true skills today and what are those skills going to be in 5 years? Because if we don't start looking 5 years down the path, by the time we create a new curriculum, by the time we train up the new instructors, by the time we do all this work, did the industry shift again? And are we ready for that shift? And so it's like I said, it's a challenging discussion. It's a worthwhile discussion. And I appreciate being part of the panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Just a final thought from my side. I really see a lack of collaboration between training providers, both public and private, NGOs that fund training, and industry. And I really think there's a missed opportunity where we are not spending enough time talking to each other to address some of the key issues that have been raised. And we all operating in silos, which I'm finding is probably a hamstring for developing skills. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights. It's been wonderful. I've learned a lot today, and I'm sure it's been well received. Hope you enjoy the rest of your days, and thanks again.
That was one of the most amazing panel discussions that I had the pleasure of listening into. Critical insights that were offered on the artisans in South Africa, or rather the scarcity of skilled artisans in South Africa. And also we realize that it's not just a South African issue, but it's a global phenomenon. In particular, the contributions from one of our panelists from the US. Thank you very much to Dr. Sean Jones for facilitating that panel discussion, and of course to all the other panelists, Dr. Jason Scales, James McKenzie, Mr. William Mkhale, and Dr. Anthony Ewer, Program Manager of Social Sustainability and National Business Initiative. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think one of the key points in summary that we can derive from that conversation was we really haven't unlocked the potential of young people in this industry. And, it's a skill is something that, can be transferred. A skill is something that is tangible. It doesn't just contribute to your resume, but it's something that could build your career even beyond your resume. So we need to kind of alter our perception around how we view our qualifications in this day and age. And I loved the inputs from a lot of the panelists, some of which stated that our recruitment must change, and that reminded me that it must be difficult to hire so that it's not easy to fire. And I think those are the most important inputs that we can get from that. And, I loved how also we ensured that, artisanry and developing that skill is concomitant to the requirements of trade. And I know one of the speakers said, how do we have responsive and agile systems to ensure that, the market shifts adequately and effectively? So also it was mentioned that, look, the money is there, we have it, but there's little return. So how do we then ensure that there's a return on investment in that regard? So thank you very much to all the panelists and to also our facilitator. You held that conversation quite effectively. And so we look forward to engaging further on some of your points that you have offered. And we look forward to also making sure that there's some kind of documentum that could contribute to policies moving forward and some of the ideas that we have.